Some fears look like indecision, but they aren't. They're grief. The grief of knowing that every choice closes a door. And for many bisexual people, that grief begins long before any relationship ever does. Because nobody talks about what happens when you're capable of loving more than one possibility. Nobody talks about the psychological weight of standing in front of multiple futures and feeling responsible for all the ones you'll never live. So people assume the fear is commitment. The fear is uncertainty. The fear is confusion. But sometimes the fear is something much darker. The fear of making the wrong choice. Not the wrong partner. The wrong life. Because once a choice becomes permanent, every unlived version of yourself suddenly becomes a ghost. And ghosts have a way of following people, especially when they've spent years wondering who they're allowed to become. That changes people, quietly, over time, without them noticing. And the strangest part is that many bisexual people don't fear choosing because they want everything. They fear choosing because they know what it's like to lose things they never got to fully experience. People often imagine attraction as a simple answer. You like this. You don't like that. You belong here. You don't belong there. But bisexuality often exists in a world obsessed with certainty. A world that treats complexity like a temporary problem waiting to be solved. A world that keeps asking the same question. So which one do you actually want? As if the existence of multiple truths somehow invalidates all of them. As if complexity is evidence of confusion. And eventually that question starts living inside your head. You stop hearing it from other people. You start hearing it from yourself. Every day, every relationship, every decision, every future. And that's where the psychological trap begins. Because the fear of making the wrong choice is rarely about romance. It's about identity. Modern culture trains people to build themselves through selection. Choose a career. Choose a brand. Choose a lifestyle. Choose an identity. Choose a relationship. Choose a future. The algorithm rewards clarity. The internet rewards certainty. Dating apps reward immediate categorization. Everything is optimized around becoming easy to understand. Easy to label. Easy to explain. But some people don't experience themselves that way. Some people experience themselves as possibilities. And possibilities become difficult to live with when the world constantly demands conclusions. So a strange survival mechanism develops. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" the question becomes, "What if I regret what I choose?" That question sounds harmless. It's not. Because regret anxiety turns every decision into a psychological courtroom. Every attraction becomes evidence. Every relationship becomes a trial. Every feeling gets cross-examined. And eventually nothing feels certain enough. Not because certainty is impossible. Because certainty became the requirement. The problem is that human beings were never designed to experience infinite alternatives all at once. But modern life makes that impossible to avoid. There is always another profile, another person, another future, another possibility, another version of happiness. Swipe culture teaches people something dangerous. That every choice can be optimized. That there is always a better option waiting one screen away. And once that mentality enters identity itself, peace becomes difficult. Because now you're not just comparing partners. You're comparing entire lives. A future with a man. A future with a woman. A future that feels familiar. A future that feels unexplored. A future that feels safe. A future that feels authentic. And the human brain hates unresolved alternatives, especially when emotional meaning is attached to them. That's why some bisexual people experience a unique form of psychological hypervigilance. Not hypervigilance toward danger, hypervigilance toward regret. They're constantly scanning themselves, monitoring themselves, analyzing themselves, trying to detect whether they are making the correct emotional investment, trying to predict future feelings before those feelings even exist, trying to guarantee certainty before vulnerability happens. But certainty never arrives, because certainty was never the real problem. Fear was, and fear is rarely logical. Fear creates impossible standards. Fear says, if this relationship is right, you should never wonder about alternatives. If this choice is right, you should never feel curiosity. If this future is correct, you should never imagine another one. But that's not how human psychology works. People can love what they have and still imagine what they don't. People can commit without becoming blind. People can choose without erasing every other possibility from existence. Yet many bisexual people grow up receiving a completely different message. They learn that attraction itself is evidence against commitment. That curiosity is evidence against certainty. That complexity is evidence against stability. So they begin treating their own minds like suspicious witnesses. Every feeling gets investigated. Every attraction becomes a threat. Every moment of uncertainty feels like proof something is wrong. And eventually exhaustion appears. A specific kind of exhaustion. The exhaustion of constantly fact-checking yourself. The exhaustion of trying to reach a level of certainty that doesn't exist. The exhaustion of carrying identities that other people keep demanding explanations for. People don't realize how psychologically expensive self-explanation can become, especially when it never seems to end. Because there comes a point when you're no longer explaining yourself to other people. You're explaining yourself to yourself, over and over, trying to finally solve something that was never meant to be solved. That creates another hidden contradiction. Many bisexual people become experts at understanding other people, but struggle to trust themselves. Because years of external questioning creates internal questioning. Years of defending your reality teaches you to interrogate your reality. Years of proving yourself teaches you to doubt yourself. And doubt has a strange effect on identity. It makes every possibility feel incomplete. You become emotionally visible, but psychologically unconvinced. You know who you are, yet somehow feel required to keep proving it. Again. And again. And again. The internet amplifies this even further. Online culture treats identity like a performance metric. People are constantly presenting curated versions of themselves, constantly optimizing visibility, constantly refining how they're perceived, and perception slowly starts replacing experience. People begin asking, how does this choice look? Instead of, how does this choice feel? That distinction matters, because perception creates pressure. Experience creates truth. And many fears about making the wrong choice aren't actually rooted in desire. They're rooted in observation. Observation of expectations. Observation of stereotypes. Observation of social narratives. Observation of what other people think your life should look like. Eventually those voices become so loud that your own voice becomes difficult to hear. That's when emotional shapeshifting often begins. Not because someone is dishonest, because they're tired. Tired of defending complexity. Tired of translating themselves. tired of existing inside categories that never seem large enough. So they start shrinking parts of themselves, editing themselves, simplifying themselves, not for authenticity, for survival. And survival always has a psychological cost. Because every suppressed possibility leaves a residue. Every hidden truth leaves an echo. Every erased piece of identity quietly asks the same question. What would have happened if I had been allowed to exist? That question can follow people for years, sometimes decades. Not because the alternative life would have been better, because it was never explored. And unexplored futures possess a unique psychological power. They remain perfect, untested, unchallenged, immune to disappointment. Reality has flaws. Fantasy doesn't. Which is why imagined lives often become unfair competitors against real ones. The mind compares lived experiences against idealized possibilities. And reality almost always loses that comparison. Not because reality failed, because fantasy never had to prove itself. That's one of the darkest psychological truths behind the fear of making the wrong choice. The fear isn't always about the future. Sometimes it's about mourning futures that never happened. And mourning is complicated when nothing technically died. No relationship ended. No tragedy occurred. No catastrophe happened. Yet something still feels lost. Something still feels unfinished. Something still feels unresolved. That feeling confuses people. But unresolved possibilities can create real grief, real sadness, real longing, even when the life being mourned never actually existed. And perhaps that's why this fear becomes so difficult to explain. Because from the outside everything can appear fine. The relationship is healthy. Life is stable. Nothing is objectively wrong. Yet internally another battle continues. A battle between acceptance and possibility. Between commitment and imagination. Between reality and alternatives. The goal isn't eliminating that tension. The goal is understanding it. Because the people who suffer most are often the ones trying to eliminate every doubt. Trying to eliminate every question. Trying to eliminate every alternative. But human beings don't become peaceful by removing every possibility. They become peaceful by accepting that no life contains all possibilities. Every life excludes something. Every future sacrifices something. Every choice closes a door. That's not failure. That's existence. The haunting truth is that the fear of making the wrong choice often survives because people believe the right choice should eliminate grief. It doesn't. Every meaningful choice contains grief. Every meaningful commitment contains loss. Every meaningful future leaves other futures behind. The difference is that healthy grief says, I chose this. Fear says, what if I shouldn't have? And those are very different voices. Because one voice is rooted in reality. The other is rooted in endless hypothetical worlds. Worlds that can never be tested. Worlds that can never disappoint. Worlds that can never prove themselves wrong. Eventually a realization emerges. A difficult one, but an important one. The opposite of confusion isn't certainty. It's self-trust. And self-trust feels different. It doesn't eliminate questions. It survives them. It doesn't eliminate possibilities. It accepts them. It doesn't demand perfect certainty. It accepts imperfect reality. Because the people most trapped by the fear of making the wrong choice are often searching for a future without loss. A future without sacrifice. A future without grief. But that future doesn't exist. Not for bisexual people. Not for anyone. The deepest human struggle has never been choosing between options. It's accepting that every meaningful life requires choosing one path while countless others disappear into the distance. And perhaps that's the hidden psychology nobody talks about. The fear was never proof that something was wrong. The fear was proof that the choice mattered. And those are not the same thing. Not even close.